Hey guys, Peter here to do an album review. Today I'm here to tell you about the latest from Watain, the Agony and Ecstasy of Watain, out April 29th on Nuclear Blast. The album has 10 tracks, 50 minutes in length, and this the band's 7th full-length studio album. They are a Swedish black metal band. Now this record has a magnificent design. I would say it's the perfect way of building an album like this. It merges two different ways of constructing a record. On one hand, you have a traditional approach that gives you two songs right at the top. You have Ecstasies and Night Infinite and the Howling, two absolute monster tracks. They're all about the aggression, the intensity, the movement, and this really gets things going as far as the overall album and the experience and the way you're going to connect with the album itself. Then in the middle you have Not Sun, Nor Man, Nor God, an interlude track that merges side A with side B. It connects Leper's Grace with Before the Cataclysm. So this is a very important track because it's not just an interlude. It doesn't just give you a reprieve, but it really binds the album together. It really allows you to see the sense of continuity from one side of the record to the other. At the end of the album you have Septentrion. I don't think you can find a better closing track in terms of how it starts, how it builds, how it moves, how it grows, how it finishes. It's really the curtains coming down on the record when you look at how this track ends the overall experience of this record. Then on the other hand, you have the live set. This album is built like a live show. It has the necessary ebbs and flows. It's constantly moving, constantly changing the eyesight of the listener, alternating more aggressive tracks, more heavier tracks with more melancholic, atmospheric songs, allowing you to see the different sides of the band, to experience the different sides of the band, making the album super dynamic, super mobile, really fluid from start to finish. When you have a record that offers these two different components or these two different styles, it really gives life to the overall experience of listening to a record. Because you're not just at this point listening to an album, you almost feel like you're experiencing Watain live, but in your home. That is the overall design, and that is the overall essence of how they built this record and the music that they packed it with it. Now, as far as soundscape is concerned, the album doesn't really have patterns. It doesn't really have formulas. It just has the Watain sound experience through and through from start to finish. One thing I will say about the sound on this record is it doesn't have just this big wall of heaviness of sound coming at you relentlessly, song in and song out. It actually offers two different approaches and then creates movement between those two different approaches. On one hand, you do have that wall of sound, you do have that sense of heaviness, aggression, a little bit of murkiness, a little bit of dirt and darkness, and how the sound is put together in terms of also how the sound is being delivered. And then on the opposite end of that, you have the more melodic Watain with a lot of atmospheric elements into that mix. The melody is kind of always there throughout the entire record, but I feel when you get to that bottom end of the spectrum, it's a lot more noticeable because it jumps into the forefront and it takes control of the songs. But the record doesn't have the sound just in one end or the other. The sound is constantly moving from one to the other. It's playing ping pong. It hits one wall, it goes back into the other, it moves across the other, and you as the listener, you're getting all of these different experiences, you're getting all of these different sounds, all of these different approaches, still Watain through and through, but just different ways of exposing their sound to the listener. And this is an aspect of this album that gives it great life, great energy, super entertaining, making the album a lot easier to digest because the softer moments of the record compensate for that heavier side that the album provides. So if the heavier side at times becomes a little bit more robust and a little bit harder to break down, the more melodic, melancholic side really makes up for it, and the balance of the two allows you to always feel comfortable regardless of where this album is going. As far as the main core elements, without saying too much about the bass, I like the bass on this record, but let's face the facts. This album really has two other elements that control the overall experience, and that is the drums and guitars. And once again, not to say that the bass is not great on this album, because it is, but it doesn't jump necessarily into the forefront enough to have a direct impact on how you're going to feel towards it. But the drums do. The drums are really interesting because they stretch themselves from those two sides. The same way the sound has these two borders, the drums work in the same exact manner. On one end, you feel like they're stretching out, creating a very long bass line, a very long foundation for these tracks to be as big, as robust as they can be. But at the exact same time that they're at the bottom end of the spectrum, they're also at the top end of the spectrum, creating heaviness, creating volume, making the songs feel powerful, and adding drive and push to how they move along. The ability to have the drums so stretched out but still feel so connected with the main focus really is a selling point on how the drums come across throughout this entire record. And the same could be said for the guitars. The guitars also have a lot of movement. They also offer a lot of diversity, from the more darker sound, the more grittier, more penetrating sound, to the more melodic, melancholic undertones, moving almost into an atmospheric realm, adding some acoustic guitars. There's a little bit of everything on this album. The guitars feel very diverse, but once again, they never lose track of where they are and where they need to go, and perhaps more important, where they're trying to take these songs. This is an album that has a path, and while things may sometimes stretch out or try to deviate from that path, they never really do. Everything always comes back to that starting point, and that's what allows you to keep the record diverse on one hand, but still very robust, connected, and very balanced all the way throughout. And speaking of balance, the vocals on this record, while there are some glimpses of differences here and there, I feel like when you get to the end of the album and you have a chance to look back and think about how the vocal approach was, I don't think you're going to see a lot of differences from song to song. They are there, but they're very little nuances that add flavor, that add atmosphere to the actual tracks. But it's very constant, it's very balanced, perhaps the glue that holds a lot of this diversity and holds a lot of this movement together. Because when the sound is going, when the sound is transporting you, when the sound has this ability to go from one end of the spectrum to the other, you need something that becomes the barometer of where the middle is. And I really feel like the vocals on this album is that barometer. All around, this is a phenomenal record. I mean, the structure, the design of the album is incredible. I honestly don't feel like they could build an album better than how they did this one, with the songs at their disposal, the idea, the thought process, creating an album that feels like a live set list, that feels like a live show, but in a studio setting, adding to that the more traditional approach of how you construct a record, to the sound, to the movement that the sound has, to the exposure that the sound gives, the texture, the layers, the ability to be simple but at the same time very dynamic. This album has all the right condiments to be one of the best Watain albums ever. I know some people are not going to agree with me, and every band always looks at their latest record as their best album yet, but this album is outstanding. The playability of this record is through the roof. You can listen to this album today, you can listen to this album 100 years from now. The quality of this album, the quality of how it was put together, how it was recorded, is not going to change. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Black Cunt. The drums and guitars working together to bring you this sense of direction, heaviness, style, and approach is phenomenal. You really feel connected with that experience from the get-go. It allows everything else to feel very balanced, very together. There's a sense of uniformity across them that really binds this song, that brings everything into the forefront. It also gives you a sense of movement. There are some melodic riffs, but those riffs are almost as dark as the heavier side of the track itself. They just feel like layers to that darkness, so they don't really change that much the overall perception that you have of the song itself. The vocals, consistent, offering the track a sense of balance, but at the same time, musically, you're going to feel like this track has different faces of Watain represented all the way throughout. Next, you have Leper's Grace. The drums and bass on this song are killer. The drums are phenomenal, but the bass really pops on this track. And if you're like me, a fan of bass on metal songs, on metal albums, a bass that has a direct impact on your experience, this song is going to check all the boxes. It has all of those parameters in it. It feels very similar to previous tracks vocally. It has a different texture perhaps, but the similarity is still there. The tone is almost the same. It's just the distance in terms of where the vocals are coming from that feels a little bit more separated from the sound. It feels a little bit deeper in the mix. So by changing that without necessarily changing the vocal delivery, you have a track that feels different almost from the get-go as far as that specific element is concerned. It adds atmosphere to the track, it adds movement, it adds energy. I really like how this song comes along, and then I like how this song merges into that interlude that then takes you into my next favorite track before the Cataclysm. Now this is my absolute favorite song on this album. This is a black metal love ballad, if Watain was ever to release a song like that. But if they were, this would be it, because this song has an incredible experience. It starts off with this thick wall of sound, this heaviness, brutality, coming at you, feeling relentless in its movement. And once you start to break that wall down, you start to see some melody there. So the wall is perhaps not as thick as you would think, because there's something right behind it. And that something is that melody. You start to see that creeping in, giving you a different perspective on the track, giving you a different emotion towards the track, making the track feel slightly more approachable, but still very dark, very somber, very enigmatic in terms of the ambiance that it creates. And then as you progress on the line, you start to see that melody creeping in more and more until it takes control of the song, and you have this moment where it's just atmosphere, it's just melody. The darkness is still there. You still feel that the song is as dark as it was in the beginning. You're just using different elements to create that same level of darkness. This makes the song super dynamic from start all the way to the end. You never really know where this song is going to take you. You never really know what the next break behind that wall is going to be like, and that gives this incredible sense of novelty to this track that just really makes it jump out. Like I said earlier, if Watain was to release a black metal love ballad, this would be it. I just love the sound, I love the experience, I love how this song makes me feel. This is it, Watain, the Agony and Ecstasy of Watain, out April 29th on Nuclear Blast. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.